And it's 7:05. Why don't we get the show on the road? Again, welcome. Please feel free to share where you're coming from in the chat. We're glad you're with us. And Anais, no worries about the camera or mic bit. Happy to have you via text capacity. Great. All right, again, this is Climate Disobedience Center's Praxis Group info session, and we are grateful to have all of you all here. And I just want to first go around our panel and introduce who we have with us. I'm Jay O'Hara, co-founder of the Climate Disobedience Center, and occasionally known to park lobster boats in front of big ships of coal and to help shut down tar sands oil pipelines. I'm coming to you from Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I want to pass it now to Marla.
Hey everybody, I'm Marla Markham. I'm also with the Climate Disobedience Center. I've been known to help people get into pipeline trenches in West Roxbury and to stand on the shore while there's a lobster boat blocking a lot of coal in a ship and other things. I'm excited to be able to share with you all about this, our first round of Praxis groups, and to invite you all to join round 2 with us.
Right.
Yeah, you go ahead with that.
Yeah. Dgenna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Dgenna, and I am a member of the Praxis group in Southern Maine, and I live in Portland, and I'm excited to be on the call with you all.
Great. Wendy, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Wendy, and I live in Auburn, Maine, and part of the Southern Maine Praxis group, and very excited to be a participant there, and I love working with my group.
Actually, Dgenna and Wendy, why don't you also say how you spend your days when you're not practicing?
Okay. I'm a high school art teacher, and I also work with the youth at our local Quaker meeting, and I am an organic gardener and have chickens.
Great. Dgenna, you want to?
Yeah, so I've spent most of my time the last couple years doing cooking education. Last year or so, mostly in local jails and prisons, and that's transitioning. So I'm seeing what's next.
Rob.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Levin from Portland, Maine, the first Portland. And I'm part of the Southern Maine Praxis group with Dgenna and Wendy and a few others. I'm an environmental lawyer during the day. I'm a father of one, and I'm a Quaker. I go to the Portland Friends meeting, and yeah, I'm excited to see who else is out there looking to Praxis.
Great. Thank you. We're so grateful for these 3 folks who are joining us, who were part of the pilot Praxis group in Maine that ran from the late spring to early summer, and have helped us really refine this model and the materials that we're using. Again, just to reiterate, the purpose of this webinar or this info session is that we're going to introduce the concept of Praxis groups, share a bit about where they've come from, why we think this is an important piece of work and maybe opportunity for at least some part of the climate movement to engage in, the need we've seen in the movement in our own work at the CDC for this type of approach. We're going to concretely describe what the program is, how it functions, and how you can get involved. And we're going to share then the experiences that these fine folks in the Southern Maine Praxis group have had in their experience engaging with the materials and the approach the format that we are calling Praxis groups. We'll have some time for questions and discussion, and we hope we should be able to wrap this up by 8 o'clock Eastern, so it shouldn't be any more than an hour. Respect the rest of your evenings, and just again want to reiterate, we've had a few more folks join us. If you've got a question, we invite you to use the Q&A button that's either down the bottom of your desktop or up the top of your tablet or iPhone or smartphone to submit questions to us. We will try and promote people to be in the video if at all possible, in engaging in conversation. And also, if you haven't yet, feel free to introduce yourself using the chat button. Let us know where you're coming from and your interests. Happy to hear also of the stories, fights, or holy trouble that you're getting yourself into wherever you may be. Great. You can also ask technical questions if you're having issues or whatever in the chat. First, we want to turn things, I want to turn to Marla here and ask Marla to share a bit about, where did Praxis groups come from? What was the need? Explain a little bit more about the need we saw and where we think this program, this approach fits into the current movement.
Great, thank you. So in our, and so when I say our, I'm talking about Jay O'Hara and Tim DeChristopher and myself, but also about other people that we've worked with from time to time and have encouraged us to pursue this model. So in our experience, strategy and the doing of climate action or of campaigning really have not been enough to hold a group together when things get really tough. And we've all experienced efforts in which we tried really hard to have a relational organizing model where we're basing the work on relationships, at least in our core group, that could help to hold us together. And then, but we recognize that over and over, there's this feeling of inertia that pulls us toward, it's sort of the culture that we're living in, right? Doing. And as soon as there's something to do, the real work of deepening those relationships with one another and making time to learn new things and for self and group transformation in the directions that we all think are necessary in order for us to be strong for the long term and to be really good at this work and to show up in a good way for others. That kind of work gets pushed aside pretty quickly because it doesn't come with a lot of deliverables. So we started to think maybe that means that even though when we've intended to work with one another in that way and we haven't been able to, maybe we need more of a structure. Maybe we need to try to pilot a thing, to try out a thing that could allow people in small groups to commit to, hey, we're gonna always set aside time. Like we're gonna make time as the fundamental thing we do together to have these relational meetings where we can discuss difficult topics sometimes, things that we need to learn about and think about together. We can share what we've been thinking and the revelations that have come to us along the way. And we can share with one another what it is that in that space of sort of contemplation and trust, we're coming to feel like we're called to do, to step out together boldly. And so, part of it is that, part of what we've recognized is that any kind of movement space that is driven a lot by big national organizations can tend to the creation of foot soldiers. And that's, I don't think we're even necessarily critiquing that so much as saying that we see another niche, another space that where we want to work with folks who who are prepared to do some experimentation and to try new things. And when they have a big idea, to have the support that they need to try it together. And not to expect that they're going to get support from some people far away, but that actually they've been building support with one another in right where they are. And you know, we've just learned very clearly that people need to feel trust and love in order to be able to take any kind of risk, whether the risk is standing up in a public meeting and saying, we need to hit this goal that is completely unrealistic in the current political reality. That's a risk. Or whether the risk is another kind of disobedience, which might look more like something that that could lead to incarceration. But if we're going to take risks and try big things, we need support from one another. So in our mind, what we're talking about is similar to an affinity group model, but it's a little more structured. And we spent some time, Tim DeChristopher and I spent some time talking to people who had piloted small group models with folks who are working on other kinds of justice issues. And their big advice to us was, you need a template for your meetings. And Jay's going to talk about that in a minute, but you need a template for your meetings. And each section needs to be pretty structured, and it's going to feel clunky and weird at first, but it actually creates enough of a container and a space for people to really be able to get into the work together and not, you know, go off on a tangent, but to focus together on the work at hand, which in a relational meeting is often about exploring like the questions of power, or Jay will list the other things for you. So not about getting things done in the way that checks off boxes, but more about getting things done in our hearts and together that help us expand and break open a little bit. The final thing that I'll say is that we've all, at the Climate Disobedience Center, and I imagine many of you, have experienced moments that might be described as some pretty toxic movement culture. And that's not us actually pointing fingers at other people in the movement. It's a recognition from us that, that we have to do more work to build spaces where people have reason to trust one another, and where it's okay for where there's not just one right way or correct analysis of things, but where we develop a culture of curiosity and learning and mutual accountability, where we can support one another to make mistakes and to know that we're going to support one another to learn from them. And then so finally, it's our hope that as we get more of these groups, that we can make sure that they're networked together, and that something that starts very small and might spread organically might be something that eventually looks a little larger and can show up in larger numbers. But we think the most important thing is giving people the base of operation to do risky things and to try big ideas together, support people to not burn out and to be in the work for the long haul. Do folks have any sort of additions about the general philosophy before we move on to the nuts and bolts that Jay's going to give us? All right.
You can also wave your hand if you do. Do that the old-fashioned hand waving way. Awesome. Thanks, Marla. So I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the nuts and bolts of how Praxis groups work. Like Marla said at the beginning, one of the core pieces we think of Praxis groups is being able to separate and kind of break apart the relational work, the trust building and love building work from the strategy work, because being able to come up with good strategy needs a foundation of love and trust that can push against one another and really do the hard part of learning. So in order to do that, we have developed a meeting template, or what we call a meeting template, for a basic relational meeting. And that has time for a few different things. It has time for personal check-ins, sharing the sorts of things that are on our hearts and affecting us as people as we do our work together. The sort of things that we need to know about one another, whether my wife just had a baby, or my dad just passed away, or my kid is sick and I've been running around, or work is crazy. Those sorts of things that make us human and allow us to compensate and to share the load as we work together in teams. Template has also an intentional time to process new learnings. So a time where we actually step back and say, like, whoa, I've just had this really big realization about this thing and how this works. I've had a new opening about the material we were talking about on structural racism last week. Something new that just really occurred to me about how we are functioning as a group and how I've been functioning as an individual. Times where the learning of an individual can really be brought out and bring the whole group along with them. Also, we build time into the template, into that relational meeting, to listen deeply to where each individual and even the group as a whole might be called into action. We actually use the language of a call to action, hearing a call, as a different way of approaching the question of, well, what are we supposed to do? That there certainly is a place for working backwards from available data about how we should get from here to there in terms of strategy. And there's a time and a place for that. Part of our thinking that underlies the Praxis group approach and the approach of hearing calls to action is that that the best and boldest and most necessary pieces of climate disobedience aren't necessarily going to come from that perfectly thought out intellectual space. It's going to come from the place that's deep in your gut that says this is wrong and this has to stop. And I know that I need to be in the way of this horrific thing that is going on under our nose or in our name. So we create space for that and structure for that. And then the core of each of the Praxis meetings, in the relational meetings, is about learning. We have developed a number of modules that focus on what we understand to be as key components and key things to think about for anyone planning to engage in climate disobedience. Now, it's not about being an exhaustive checklist of everything you need to have studied, learned, thought about, but it's a kind of dip your toe or maybe put your left leg in to really get a sense of what we need to be thinking about. And some of the material certainly will be familiar to some folks who have engaged in civil disobedience or nonviolence in the past. Some of the modules and the curricula may be pretty different. So Praxis groups, there's kind of a continuum that we see Praxis groups happening on. So that's the meeting template piece. But now I want to talk through the flow of how we see Praxis groups occurring. Praxis groups is, we hope that Praxis groups are ongoing groups that are going to engage in action and continued learning. But we also have built into the idea of Praxis groups a 9 meeting, could call them weeks or however you want to think about it, but 9 meetings of a type of curriculum. And that this basic kind of core curriculum are the subject areas, at least, that we think are necessary for a group, not only to have thought about individually, but to have deeply engaged in with one another, to know and find out how deep the affinity is for each of the members of the group, to be able to know if, like, we are sharing enough of the similar values in order to proceed into risky action, and also to be able to pull out into the room the sorts of questions that a group might need to answer for themselves before proceeding into the arms of the law. That's a little sinister. So when a praxis group starts, we invite people to be conveners, to convene groups around them, either of people they know or people know deeply, or people in the climate movement in your area more broadly. And then to work through as a group this 9-session curriculum. The Southern Maine group chose to go through it in meet every 2 weeks. So they took like 16 weeks to get through. And then at the end of that curriculum period, that base curriculum is a meeting for really to call the question, is this a praxis group? Is this a group that is ready to move forward into action and to continue on as an entity? Do we have enough affinity built between us and enough shared values and outlook that we can really move together? Or there's always the possibility that there might be multiple groups with different sorts of understandings of how the work proceeds. Maybe different understandings of nonviolence, maybe different understandings of how one engages in spiritual matters, or
different enough geography.
That's always a good one too. So we conclude kind of with that question, are we a group? And then offer to groups who do say, yes, we are a group and we're ready to continue, kind of a la carte options for curriculum to keep honing their thinking and responding to the needs of the group as the group goes out into action and continues their relational work. Just want to run through the types of materials that we're sharing and asking people to work through. Certainly asking people to work through their own relationship with the urgent reality and the magnitude and maybe even hopelessness of the climate crisis itself. Asking people to work through questions around privilege and shame, things that keep us stuck, either stuck from being our fullest, boldest selves, or actually the opposite of that, being fuller and bolder and too bold in relationship to the privileges and the identities that are actually harmful to our fellow activists in the movement and in the movement of movements. We dig into power. We dig into really the questions around nonviolence. What is nonviolence? Who are the players in nonviolence? How does it work? How has it worked historically? How does it work in theory? We invite people into conversation about vulnerability and invitational natures of nonviolent action. We have a section on movement context, trying to situate ourselves in the broad arc of the climate movement over the last, well, certainly the last 10 years or 20 years. But for those who have read the Losing Earth article in the New York Times magazine, certainly is interesting to context ourselves in the last 40 years of the rinse and repeat nature of climate action or climate activism. Have a unit on strategic thinking, and then a final unit, time to call those questions that we're talking about whether this is a group or not. That's the curriculum piece. A couple last things that we are bringing as the Climate Disobedience Center into praxis groups. We ask that praxis groups rotate facilitation, and we at the Climate Disobedience Center are here to support and coach facilitators through each of the weeks of their session that they're leading. We're also here as a praxis group matures into an action phase and is ready to commit to the action as well as the principles of the Climate Disobedience Center. We at the Climate Disobedience Center are here to be both action support and to provide coaching and assistance and thought partners and brainstormers and all that sort of stuff for those who are engaging in action. And again, our hope is that as Praxis groups multiply, that you all will be able to help you all network together in ways that might take pieces of the movement in directions that we certainly can't anticipate. That's all I've got in terms of the logistics, or at least the program. We'll touch on the logistics of where we go from here in a bit. But next I want to take, again, reminder to those folks who are out there, put your questions in the Q&A tab or put them in the chat and we'll get to them. We're going to move now to hearing from our Southern Maine Praxis folks, which we were so honored and blessed to be able to work with these fine folks and to get their feedback and engagement, and also to see them begin to move into action in the last month and grapple with that as well. At this point, I really want to focus on the introductory Praxis piece, the first 8 sessions that you all did, and in turn ask each of you a couple of questions.
Jay, can you just say real quick, keep going back between 8 and 9. Can you just explain why that is?
Right. Yeah, that's because we've added, in response to how Southern Maine Group has proceeded, and as we move into bigger geographical areas, we've added another additional piece into our curriculum. So that's why I keep bouncing back between 8 and 9. Want to ask these folks and invite Rob and Dgenna and Wendy to engage a little bit on the kind of following 2 questions, or wherever these take you. You know, would love to hear you share what the most challenging part of the Praxis work was for you, and that could be whether the content, whether it was the form, or whether it was something else. You know, what was challenging, what was growthful to you, and why? And also to speak a little more broadly to what needs does this fill for you in your own organizing work and your climate work and the movement context that you all find yourselves in Maine? These aren't trick questions. They knew about them earlier. So hopefully we'll get some answers from them. But want to turn first to Wendy. If you'd be willing to share first, Wendy.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so I did jot a few things down. I think as far as challenging, I'm trying to think. There weren't a lot of challenges. I think the most challenging thing was there were a few articles that were pretty heavy. And so challenging, thinking through those and the discussions around those articles. So that kind of, I guess, was the challenge. I love this group. I feel like I've been in a number of different climate action groups. I was drawn to this group because I really feel like I want to do my action from a place of love. And I like that it's a group that I feel trusted. I feel that my voice is heard. I feel that I can bring crazy ideas and I feel that they will say it's crazy or say, oh, we can try that. Or the experimental aspect of it has really been freeing for me, that we don't have to have the right way, the right action, do it the right time. We can, you know, delve into it, get a sense of the group, and try something out, which that has been really cool. I think the curriculum gave us a common language. So it's a lot of stuff that we probably thought and agreed on, but it was really helpful to have deep conversations around that. And also to just always be aware that we're going to have this group and we want to think about what our ahas are, what are we thinking, or what are we bringing to the group. So those have been really, really good parts of my thinking, and always kind of thinking about the group and what's the next step. I really did also appreciate the shared leadership, and there was a lot of support. So when it was our turn or my turn to facilitate, I appreciated having the calls from Jay and or Marla to talk about how we could structure the meeting, what we could talk about, and then also the debriefing afterwards. So it was really nice to have some ideas about how to facilitate, and then to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and kind of debrief. Yeah, I just really appreciate that. I really feel that all of us in our group have equal voices, and that's really been important. And that this is a group that I think is going to continue, and that feels really good. That we're not basing our group on a single action, but we're basing our group because we want to be a group, and then the actions come out of being together and caring about the same things and wanting to make a difference.
Great. Thanks, Wendy.
You're welcome.
Want to pitch to Rob?
Yeah, my turn. So yeah, I echo a lot of what Wendy said. We haven't really had, I don't think we have big egos in the group. And there's about 6 of us who are regulars, and the personalities have really meshed well. So we haven't been tested with like a really difficult conflict situation, at least not yet. But part of that is also because of the way it was set up with intentionality and thoughtfulness. Some of the challenges, just the logistics of finding a time that works for people and making it a priority. I mean, it can't just be like a half-assed thing. You gotta make it a priority and say like, yep, I'm gonna make space for this one way or another. And if you're like us, you know, you've had like 10 other things you're involved in and you don't want to give any of them up, but you got to figure out whether you give that up or if you add this on, like just commit to it, because it doesn't work if people really aren't coming regularly, which isn't to say all of us have been to every single meeting, but I think all of us have went to at least 5 or 6 of the 8. So there was a sense of critical mass each time, and momentum and connection. And ideally, it's not going to feel like work too. So it'll, like for myself, there were a few nights when I was like, oh yeah, I got to do the Praxis. But most of the time I was just like, oh, that's going to be fun tonight, hanging out with that group, as opposed to the meeting, the work meeting, the activist work meeting, which I've been to a lot of those, and those are important, but that's not what this has been. And so it hasn't felt too hard, but people have to make it a priority. The other thing I think that can be a challenge is keeping the focus on like climate disobedience, as opposed to like turning it into a climate gripe session or a climate political discussion, or just like what action can we do. Like it's important for me that it stay focused on disobedience, and we all have that sort of creep of conversation. And so I think for me it's an experiment, like Marla said earlier, it's an experiment. We're trying it out. It's not like we're expecting to hit it right away, the truth, but it is important, I think, for me to distinguish it from like but just like other groups that are doing things that are more mainstream. And so that's been, I mean, I've had to remind myself of that at times. I think as a group, we've had to think about that, both meeting to meeting and overall, what's our purpose here? And having said that, there reached a point at the end of our 8 or 9 sessions when we had to figure out, like we were working towards, and we actually came up with an idea together and we're fleshing it out. And we realized like, actually none of us were ready to get arrested right now. And we had to just be honest with each other for what we were up for. And so we were working on an action now as a group that's technically illegal, but pretty low stakes, like a maybe like a graffiti charge or something like that. So we're not, you know, we're at the low stakes level, but I think we're all open to getting to the next level. But for various reasons, some of us because of past arrests or job or, you know, just needing to get in that space. So it hasn't just been easy, like, okay, we formed the group and now we're all like getting arrested and having these huge, I mean, I feel like we're doing an important action, but we're not, you know, we're not lying in front of the railroad, the coal trains yet or anything like that. So, but it still feels like, as an experiment in truth, it feels really important and powerful and impactful so far. I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
Dgenna?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I echo a lot of what was just said. And I was like thinking of the word experiment and truth. So much of this has been an experimentation. And I think it's also gets to some of the aspects that are challenging, is that part of me wants to always jump into the, you know, sort of what's next in the action. I think for our group, it's been challenging to be in tune with our capacity. And Rob just shared one of those aspects of what is our capacity right now for arrest, for instance. And also to be, I think for me, stepping back to think in terms of an experiment that leads to another experiment and the possibility for new possibilities emerging has been challenging for me to sort of shift into that mode from a lot of the other modes that I experience in other aspects of culture and work. I think the content piece, I want to echo what Wendy said about the sort of how valuable that is, and how much as a group and for me, we came together by developing that common language, and also how challenging that is also because of the quantity of content. And so that's part of that commitment, that showing up together that Rob described also involves showing up prepared. And I think our group did really well with that. I was really impressed how much it felt like we were coming with the things to talk about, and having rested and sat with content and the previous week. And so that was one of the things that made it powerful, but also something I was grateful for, because I don't think many of the groups I've been a part of get into it that way when there's such a quantity of things to immerse oneself in. I guess to the question of things that have been life-giving and that I've gained, I guess having a group that focuses on guidance from the Spirit and being present together and being in tune is, I think, really, really important and healing for me, and a practice. I think it's really incredible to be called into the space for real creativity as we go forward and keep moving and keep figuring out what we're doing, that we have this space where I feel called to be creative and consider what's right first in that creativity rather than what's maybe practical. And I think that's really cool. I felt that my creative hat has gone on a lot more about other things, so that I'm dreaming about art and actions all the time and not necessarily stuff that's coming to the group. And so that's really fun, because it gets me, I just have felt more creative and sustained in hope than I had before this group started. Sustained with a sense that that there's potential here in this sort of work. And just feeling like here's a space where I'm connecting with folks who have these shared values and are working to do things.
Awesome. Thank you all. I am, those were lovely, lovely reflections. important point that we're trying to, an important role that we see praxis groups playing, that we think of the whole movement, actually, and the movement of movements in terms of a movement ecology. And it's not that we certainly do not think that everyone should be doing praxis groups. We think there are certainly people who should be involved in all sorts of different aspects of climate activism. And that there are certain people within that ecology that are drawn to a higher and riskier modes of acting. And our hope is that in whatever group relationship might exist, that the praxis framework can help a group come together and be a collecting point in that ecology of the movement, to bring that piece in a whole diversity of tactics and a whole diversity, a whole range of things that need to happen in the movement. We have a couple questions, one from Cindy, one from David. I'm just going to answer real quick. Cindy is asking if we live in different areas of the country, and David is also kind of asking similarly, are we open to praxis groups meeting only by video conference? So the Climate Disobedience Center, the three folks that are our core team live in slightly different places, but we all live in the Northeast, thereabouts. And so we are together on a semi-regular basis. Praxis group in Maine, and our vision for praxis groups more generally is that they really are location driven and geographically driven. We believe pretty strongly that the bonds of trust and understanding one another come not just from conversation of ideas, but really come from living, breathing people being in the room together, being able to see the tears or emotions or struggles that are happening in someone's heart sitting next to you, to be able to feel the heartbeat moving in action or contemplating action together or role-playing action together. That those kind of ineffable human qualities of togetherness are an essential ingredient in building a firm foundation to move from. Thanks. We also have a question from Michael Bork. And Michael, I'm not sure if you are videoable, but I'll bring you into this as well. Michael, are you with us? Well, yeah, I got it. Yeah,
Hi.
We can hear you.
Okay.
What's your question?
Well, I am with a group of students working towards divestment of the endowment at the university from fossil fuels. And we have been more on the petition side of things. And I guess I wonder about if you have resources for this kind of potential civil disobedience. I know folks have been sitting in places and whatnot, but as opposed to doing tree sits or whatever, do you have sort of ideas or resources for folks doing investment?
Yeah, great. Thanks. And I'm just going to mute you. We've got some static on the line. I think, so to be honest, we don't have specific divestment related materials and resources, but I think it would be really interesting to see if you were interested in starting a group that wanted to engage in civil disobedience and wanted to think about how to bring civil disobedience into your divestment campaign at your university. That the praxis model would be a foundation for you all to build have the sort of conversations that are necessary to approach thinking about doing that sort of work. So I would love for you to be to show your interest if you think what we've expressed today here might be useful or a useful way in, and we'd be really interested in having a conversation with you about how we could help you start a praxis group on your campus, definitely. So to close this up, I want to first again thank Wendy, thank Rob, thank Dgenna for joining us and sharing a bit about your experience today. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us for the evening. We're going to be sending out an email to follow up with everyone who signed up for this webinar, and it's going to have two things in it. It's going to have the recording. So if you want to share it with your friends to find out more and help them get an inside scoop and maybe get excited about starting a Praxis group in your area, you'll be able to share it with them. The other thing that would be the next step, if you're interested right now in exploring what a Praxis group could look like or starting a Praxis group could look like in your area, we'll send a link to a little bit of a questionnaire that asks a little bit more about you and your relationship to the climate movement and maybe your experience, and asks you to share a little bit in more detail about what you're hungering for and hungering to bring into the movement. So we'll ask you to—
Can I just emphasize here that that's not a test.
Yeah.
It's a way for us to know more about you and you know from what perspective you're entering the work. It's not there's not a bar for you to cross for a certain amount of— there's not a certain amount of experience you need or a certain amount that we think is too much.
And I think it's fair to say from my experience that sometimes those who feel like they are outside of the climate movement and are really new at this have the most crucial and important insights as to how we can be doing better, because they're not steeped in any sort of dogma or straitjacket of what we're supposed to do in the climate movement. So filling out that questionnaire will help us get to know you a little bit better, and we'll follow up and have one-on-one conversations. And those conversations will be the basis for helping you both pull together a Praxis group and figure out what sort of structure is going to work best where you are. We have guides and detailed information to help people who are would-be conveners think through kind of the natural steps that it'll take to bring a group together. And again, support from those of us at the CDC the whole way along. Wendy, Rob, or Dgenna, or Marla, any final thoughts or pieces of wisdom before we sign off for the night?
Well, I did want to like offer an example of what we actually did. I put a website in the comments of the action we're doing. And I mean, it's not to say that's what you should do. Just like, this is just because we've alluded to it a couple times, and I didn't want to be coy about it. Like, we're proud of what we're doing and we're excited about it. So you can see it in the links. It's hightidehere.org is the website that explains what we came up with. And it's an experiment and it's evolving, and we'll see where it goes. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Rob.
Context.
I just want to say being part of this group has it's been refreshing and giving me hope. It's great to be with a group that we're in it for the long haul, and it's building love and trust. So it's been really a great experience.
Thanks, Wendy.
And I'll share the same thing as Wendy, and just that I'm excited about how this is catching on. And this exciting about this meeting.
Thanks, Dgenna.
I'm grateful for our Southern Maine Praxis group friends, and just for the opportunity to be in this work with more and more people who are committed to grounding themselves in trust and love where they are, because I think it's easier for us to then operate with trust and love beyond those groups if we have that really solid base where we're coming from. So I'm looking forward to doing that with more and more of you.
Awesome. Thank you all who joined us. Again, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording and with the link to the questionnaire. Grateful to all of you who asked questions, and thanks for hanging on with us. Spread the word, and let's see where some of this learning, growing, changing, and challenging the status quo can take us. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, friends.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye.